Tehran, 1979. The peacock throne, which had symbolized Persian royalty for centuries, sat empty. The palaces that once hosted kings and queens stood silent. A family that had ruled Iran for half a century was scattered across the globe, never to return home. This is the story of the Pahlavi dynasty, a family that rose to absolute power, accumulated unimaginable wealth, and then lost everything in a revolution that changed the Middle East forever. What came after would prove even more heartbreaking than what came before. The dynasty that began with a coup. Reza Khan was born in 1878 in a small village in Mazandaran province. His family had no royal blood, no inherited titles, no palaces. At 15 years old, he joined the Persian Cossack Brigade as a simple soldier. Through force of personality, courage, and ruthless ambition, he climbed the ranks to become a brigadier general by 1918. In 1921, Reza Khan led a coup that overthrew the Qajar dynasty, which had ruled Persia for over a century. The Qajars had become weak, their power eroded by foreign interference from Britain and Russia. Reza Khan installed himself first as Minister of War, then as Prime Minister. For 4 years, he consolidated power, defeated tribal rebellions, and built support among those who wanted a strong, modern Persia. On December 12, 1925, Iran's parliament met as a constituent assembly and formally deposed the young Qajar Shah, Ahmad Shah. They declared Reza Khan the new Shah of Persia. He chose the dynastic name Pahlavi, which recalled the Middle Persian language of the ancient Sasanian Empire. 3 days later, Reza Shah Pahlavi took his imperial oath. On April 25, 1926, he held his coronation. His son, Mohammad Reza, just 6 years old, was proclaimed Crown Prince. A new dynasty had been born. Reza Shah set out to transform Persia into a modern nation. He built roads, railways, universities, schools, and hospitals. He established a national bank and professional bureaucracies. In 1935, he asked foreign countries to use the name Iran instead of Persia in all official correspondence. The country would no longer be defined by what outsiders called it. It would define itself. But Reza Shah's modernization came with an iron fist. He suppressed opposition ruthlessly. He forced women to remove their veils, angering religious conservatives. He centralized power, leaving little room for dissent. When World War II began, Reza Shah tried to maintain neutrality while flirting with Nazi Germany. Britain and the Soviet Union, fearing that Iran might become a Nazi ally, invaded the country in August 1941. On September 16, 1941, British and Soviet forces occupied Tehran. Reza Shah was forced to abdicate. The Allies wanted him gone, but they didn't want to destroy the monarchy entirely. They needed stability in Iran to secure oil supplies and protect supply routes to the Soviet Union. The solution was to replace Reza Shah with his 21-year-old son. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi took the throne while his father was sent into exile in South Africa. Reza Shah died there in 1944, never seeing Iran again. His body was eventually returned and buried in a mausoleum outside Tehran, though that tomb would later be destroyed after the 1979 revolution, the young Shah, and 3 failed marriages. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was born on October 26, 1919, in Tehran. He had a twin sister, Ashraf, born 4 hours after him. Educated at La Rosie boarding school in Switzerland, Mohammad Reza spoke Persian, English, French, and German fluently. He completed his education at the Military College of Tehran and was appointed Inspector of the Army, spending 3 years travelling across Iran examining military and civil installations. When he became Shah at 21, Mohammad Reza inherited a country occupied by foreign powers. For the first 12 years of his reign, he struggled simply to maintain Iran's independence. The British and Soviets didn't fully withdraw until after the war ended. The young Shah was insecure, uncertain, nothing like the strong-willed father who had built the dynasty. His personal life reflected that uncertainty. In 1939, he married Princess Fawzia of Egypt, sister of King Farouk. She was stunningly beautiful, but the marriage was arranged for political reasons. They had one daughter together, Princess Shahnaz, born in 1940. The couple divorced in 1948. Fawzia found life in Iran stifling and returned to Egypt. Their daughter remained with her father. In 1951, Mohammad Reza married again. Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari was half Persian, half German, educated in Europe, and exceptionally beautiful. The Shah appeared genuinely in love with her. They seemed happy together, travelling, hosting state dinners, presenting the image of a modern royal couple. But the marriage lasted 7 years and produced no children. The Shah's mother and the royal court put enormous pressure on him. Iran's constitution required a male heir. Without one, there was no clear succession. The pressure became unbearable. In 1958, the Shah made the painful decision to divorce Soraya. She was heartbroken. Years later, she would say it was the greatest sadness of her life. She never remarried, living out her days in Europe, always maintaining her dignity, but never quite recovering from being cast aside for something beyond her control. The Shah publicly expressed regret about the divorce, but duty to the dynasty came first. The Shah needed an heir, and he needed one quickly. In 1959, he met Farah Diba, a 21-year-old architecture student in Paris. She came from a good family, but wasn't royalty. Her father had been a captain in the Imperial Iranian army and had died when she was young. Farah was intelligent, elegant, and cultured. They married on December 21, 1959. This time, the gamble paid off. On October 31, 1960, Farah gave birth to a son, Crown Prince Reza. Cannons fired. Celebrations erupted across Tehran. The dynasty finally had its heir. 3 more children followed. Princess Farah arrived in 1963, Prince Ali Reza in 1966, and Princess Layla in 1970. After 2 failed marriages, Mohammad Reza had found not just a wife who could give him children, but a genuine partner. Farah became more than a consort. When the Shah gave her the title Shahbanu, or Empress, in 1967, it was a rank created especially for her. Previous queens had simply been called Malakeh, or Queen. Farah was elevated above them all. But even as the royal family grew, forces were building that would eventually destroy everything they had: the White Revolution and rising discontent. In the early 1950s, the Shah faced the greatest challenge of his reign. Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, a zealous nationalist with enormous popular support, convinced Parliament to nationalise Britain's extensive oil interests in Iran. The British Oil Company had been extracting Iranian oil since 1913, keeping most of the profits. Iranians resented this deeply. The Shah supported nationalisation in principle, but worried about Mossadegh's confrontational tactics toward Britain and growing communist influence. In August 1953, the Shah tried to dismiss Mossadegh, but the Prime Minister's support was so strong that the Shah himself was forced to flee Iran. He escaped to Rome with Soraya, convinced his reign was over. For several days he lived in hotels, wondering if he would ever return. Then, in what would become one of the most controversial events in modern Middle Eastern history, British and American intelligence agencies orchestrated a coup against Mossadegh. The CIA operation, known as Operation Ajax and led by Agent Kermit Roosevelt Jr., used propaganda, bribery, and orchestrated demonstrations to turn the military and public against the Prime Minister. Pro-Shah demonstrators filled the streets. The military moved against Mossadegh. Within days, Mossadegh was overthrown and placed under house arrest. The Shah returned to Tehran in triumph, now owing his throne to the United States. This debt to America would haunt the Shah for the rest of his reign. Many Iranians would forever see him as a puppet of Western powers installed by a foreign coup. The CIA's role would be declassified decades later, confirming what Iranians had long believed. That resentment never faded, but for the next 2 decades, the Shah used American support to transform Iran into a regional power. In the early 1960s, he launched the White Revolution, a sweeping program of modernization that included land reform, infrastructure development, expanded education, voting rights for women, and reduced illiteracy. The White Revolution produced dramatic results. Iran's economy boomed. By the mid-1970s, the country's GDP was growing at over 10% annually. Oil revenues funded massive development projects. New roads, dams, hospitals, and schools appeared across the country. Literacy rates climbed. Women entered universities and the workforce in unprecedented numbers. By 1976, Iran saw its largest ever economic growth. According to the World Bank, the Shah had increased Iran's per capita GDP to over $10,000 when adjusted to $2,010, the highest in Iranian history. The Shah saw himself foremost as a Persian king. In 1971, he held an extravagant celebration at Persepolis to mark the 2500th anniversary of the Persian monarchy. Kings, queens, presidents, and prime ministers from around the world attended. Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, President Nicolae Ceausescu of Romania, King Hussein of Jordan, and dozens of other dignitaries arrived. The festivities lasted days and cost tens of millions of dollars. Champagne from France, caviar from the Caspian Sea, and elaborate tents designed by a Parisian firm filled the ancient ruins. Maxims of Paris catered the meals. The tent city alone cost over $100 million in today's dollars. The Shah wanted to show that Iran had reclaimed its place among the world's great civilizations, connecting modern Iran to the ancient Persian Empire of Cyrus the Great. But the opulence alienated many Iranians. While the royal family and elite lived in extraordinary luxury, large portions of the population remained poor. The White Revolution's benefits had mostly gone to the upper and middle classes. The rural poor felt left behind. Religious leaders resented the secularization and westernization. The Shah's increasing authoritarianism made things worse. To suppress dissent, the Shah relied on Savak, his secret police force. Savak became infamous for torture and repression. Political prisoners were jailed without trial. Opponents disappeared. The more the Shah cracked down, the more resistance grew. Students, intellectuals, religious conservatives, leftists, all found reasons to oppose the regime. The Shah's Western lifestyle, his closeness to America, and his brutal security apparatus turned more and more Iranians against him. In 1964, a Shia cleric named Ruhollah Khomeini had been particularly vocal in criticizing the Shah. He called for the overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of an Islamic state. The Shah exiled him, first to Turkey, then to Iraq. For 15 years, Khomeini lived across the border, sending radio messages to his supporters inside Iran. His influence grew steadily. The Shah dismissed him as an irrelevant fanatic. It was a fatal miscalculation, the revolution that shattered everything. By 1978, Iran was in crisis. Economic problems, corruption, and political repression had created a powder keg. On January 9, 1978, a demonstration in the religious city of Qom was violently suppressed. People were killed, According to Shia tradition, memorial services are held 40 days after a death. Those memorial services turned into protests. Those protests turned into more violence, more deaths, more memorials. The cycle repeated, building momentum with each turn. In August 1978, a terrible tragedy accelerated the collapse. A fire at the Cinema Rex in Ibadan killed over 400 people. Protesters blamed SAVAK, claiming the secret police had locked the doors and set the fire. The government blamed radical Islamists. To this day, the truth remains disputed, but the immediate effect was to inflame public anger to unprecedented levels. On September 8, 1978, the Shah declared martial law. That day became known as Black Friday. In Jaleh Square in Tehran, security forces opened fire on demonstrators. The exact death toll is unknown. Some reports claimed dozens dead, others said hundreds. The massacre turned even more Iranians against the Shah. By late 1978, strikes paralyzed the country. Oil workers walked off the job, crippling Iran's economy. Millions of people took to the streets demanding the Shah's removal. The military remained loyal, but the Shah faced an impossible choice. He could order a full military crackdown, which would require massacring thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of his own people. Or he could leave. In December 1978, world leaders gathered at a conference in Guadeloupe. The Shah's Western allies, including US President Jimmy Carter, concluded that there was no feasible way to save the Iranian monarchy. The revolution had become too powerful. Even American support couldn't stop it. On January 16, 1979, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi and Empress Farah left Iran on a Boeing jet. The official story was that the Shah needed a vacation for health reasons. Everyone knew the truth. The Shah was fleeing, never to return. Millions of Iranians poured into the streets celebrating. 2 weeks later, on February 1st, Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile after 15 years abroad. Several million people greeted him at the airport. 10 days later, on February 11th, Iran's military declared itself neutral. Guerrillas and rebel troops overwhelmed forces loyal to the Shah. The Pahlavi dynasty had fallen. The Shah would never see Iran again. He was 59 years old, suffering from lymphatic cancer that had been secretly progressing for years. His treatment had been kept hidden because he feared showing weakness. Now, in exile, dying, he had nowhere to go. The desperate search for refuge. The fall shocked the Pahlavi family. For 54 years they had been Iran's rulers. Suddenly, they were refugees. The Shah, Empress Farah, and their younger children flew first to Egypt, where President Anwar Sadat welcomed them. But they couldn't stay long. The Shah needed medical treatment, and Egypt lacked the facilities. They moved to Morocco, where King Hassan II offered temporary shelter. Then to the Bahamas. Then to Mexico. Always moving, always temporary, always under tight security. It was, as Crown Prince Reza later described it, like living in a fortress. Crown Prince Reza himself wasn't with the family when they fled. At 17, he had left Iran in 1978 for pilot training at Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas. He was being trained to become a fighter pilot in the Imperial Iranian Air Force. When the revolution happened, he was still in Texas. He finished his training in March 1979, then joined his family in their exile. The life he'd been raised for no longer existed. In October 1979, the Shah entered the United States for cancer treatment at New York Hospital. It was a controversial decision that would have enormous consequences. Many Americans opposed admitting him, knowing it would anger the new Iranian government. President Carter reluctantly agreed on humanitarian grounds after intense lobbying from friends of the Shah, including Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller. The decision triggered an immediate crisis. On November 4th, 1979, Iranian students calling themselves Students Following the Line of the Imam stormed the US Embassy in Tehran and took 52 American hostages. With Khomeini's approval, they demanded the Shah be returned to Iran to stand trial for his crimes against the Iranian people. The United States refused to negotiate. The hostage crisis would last 444 days and destroy Carter's presidency. Images of blindfolded American hostages dominated television screens around the world. The Shah became toxic, a man nobody wanted. The Shah left America in December 1979 as the hostage crisis continued, moving to Panama. But even there, he wasn't safe. Panama's government, under pressure from Iran and worried about violence, wanted him gone. In March 1980, Anwar Sadat offered permanent refuge. The Shah returned to Egypt, the country where this nightmare journey had begun 14 months earlier. On July 27, 1980, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi died in Cairo from complications of lymphoma. He was 60 years old. He was buried in the Al-Rifai Mosque in Cairo, where his father had also briefly been interred. The funeral was small. Few world leaders attended. The man who had once ruled Iran with absolute power died in exile, separated from his homeland. 3 days after the Shah's death, on his 20th birthday, Crown Prince Reza declared himself the new Shah of Iran in a ceremony at the Kuba Palace in Cairo. He became Reza Shah II in exile, maintaining that the monarchy remained the legitimate government of Iran. The United States quickly issued a statement saying it did not support Pahlavi's claim and recognized the Islamic Republic as Iran's government. The young prince would spend the rest of his life fighting for a throne he would never sit on, a family broken by exile. The Pahlavi children had been raised in extraordinary privilege. They lived in palaces. They had servants, tutors, bodyguards. They travelled the world. Crown Prince Reza was officially named heir at his father's coronation in 1967, when he was just 6 years old. He attended a private school at the palace and was captain of the soccer team. His siblings grew up similarly protected, raised by governesses and staff, living in a bubble of wealth and security. Then, almost overnight, it all disappeared. Princess Layla was only 9 when the family fled. Prince Ali Reza was 12. Princess Faranaz was 15. Crown Prince Reza was 17. They had lost their country, their father was dying, and they faced a future with no clear path. Their half-sister, Princess Shahnaz, from the Shah's first marriage, was already an adult with her own family, but the younger children were thrust into a traumatic displacement. After the Shah's death, Empress Farah and the children settled in the United States, eventually making their home in Greenwich, Connecticut. Crown Prince Reza enrolled at Williams College in Massachusetts, but dropped out after a year when his father died. He tried the American University in Cairo, but attended irregularly. Eventually, he completed a political science degree by correspondence from the University of Southern California in 1985. He married Yasmin Etemad Amini in 1986, and they had 3 daughters. He spent his time trying to build support for a return to Iran, meeting with exiles, giving interviews, writing books. In 1986, with CIA support according to journalist Bob Woodward, he made an 11-minute television broadcast into Iran declaring he would return. Nothing came of it. The younger children struggled even more. They had been children when they lost everything. They'd grown up watching their parents deposed, their father die in exile, their family scattered. The psychological damage was profound. Princess Layla was the youngest, just 9 when her world collapsed in 1979. She was too young to really understand what was happening, but old enough to feel the trauma. She grew up commuting between Connecticut and Paris, where her mother spent much time. She spoke Persian, English, French, and some Spanish and Italian. She studied literature and philosophy at Brown University, though sources conflict on whether she actually graduated or dropped out due to declining health. She worked briefly as a model for the designer Valentino, appearing elegant and poised in photographs. But behind the glamorous facade, she suffered terribly. She battled anorexia nervosa, bulimia, severe depression, low self-esteem, and chronic fatigue syndrome. Her body became emaciated, her spirit broken. She felt lost, without purpose, carrying the weight of a lost empire she barely remembered. She had grown up as a princess in exile, neither fully Iranian nor fully Western, belonging nowhere, haunted by a past she couldn't reclaim and a future she couldn't envision. On June 10, 2001, Layla was found dead in her room at the Leonard Hotel in London. She was 31 years old. An autopsy revealed she had more than 5 times the lethal dose of Seconal, a barbiturate used to treat insomnia, in her system, along with a non-lethal amount of cocaine. She had stolen the Seconal from her doctor's desk during an appointment. She'd been addicted to the medication. Her body was emaciated by years of eating disorders. The coroner ruled it an overdose. Whether it was intentional or accidental, Layla had become another victim of the family's exile. Empress Farah had now buried her husband and her youngest daughter. The pain would only continue, the unbearable loss of a second child. Prince Ali Reza had always been quieter than his older brother Reza. He wasn't interested in politics or the spotlight. He was a scholar. He graduated from Princeton University with a degree in music and ethnomusicology. He completed a master's degree in ancient Iranian studies at Columbia University. He began working toward a doctorate in ancient Iranian studies and philology at Harvard. He loved Persian history and culture. He wanted to preserve and study the heritage of the country he could never return to. Ali Reza never married, though he had been engaged to Sarah Tabatabai for many years. When that engagement fell apart, he was left alone. He had a daughter, Iriana, with his companion, Raha Didivar, but he didn't live with them. He kept largely to himself in his apartment in Boston. Neighbours would occasionally see him driving his Porsche, wearing jeans and a tattered blazer. He seemed isolated, disconnected. Unlike his brother, who had a wife, children, an office and a mission, Ali Reza had very little anchoring him to life. He was deeply disturbed by what was happening in Iran under the Islamic Republic. He carried the burden of his father's death, his sister Layla's death, and the loss of his homeland. Friends said he struggled for years to overcome his sorrow, but never quite managed it. On January 4, 2011, Ali Reza was found dead in his Boston apartment from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 44 years old. He left no note, but his brother Reza issued a statement describing how Ali Reza had been disturbed by the ills that had fallen upon Iran, and how he'd finally succumbed to his grief. Empress Farah had now lost 2 of her 4 children. Both had taken their own lives, 1 daughter and 1 son, dead in their 30s and 40s. The surviving children, Crown Prince Reza and Princess Faranaz, continued on, but the weight of these losses hung over the entire family. They had lost Iran, lost their father, lost their position, and now they were losing each other. There is something uniquely tragic about royal families in exile. They grow up believing they have a destiny, a purpose, a country to rule. When that's taken away, especially violently, especially as children, many never recover. They're left grasping for something that will never return. For some, like Crown Prince Reza, activism and advocacy provide meaning. For others, like Layla and Ali Reza, the void proves impossible to fill. The long shadow of the peacock throne. Today, more than 45 years after the revolution, the Pahlavi family remains in exile. Crown Prince Reza, now in his 60s, continues to advocate for regime change in Iran. He speaks at rallies, meets with political leaders, appears on Persian-language television broadcasts that Iranians watch via satellite. He established the National Council of Iran in Paris in 2013 as a government in exile. In 2019, he launched the Phoenix Project of Iran, attempting to bring opposition groups together around a vision for a post-clerical Iran. But the question remains, do Iranians want the monarchy back? Crown Prince Reza hasn't lived in Iran since he left at age 17 in 1978. He's now spent more than 40 years in exile. Most Iranians alive today were born after the revolution. They have no memory of the monarchy. They know the Islamic Republic's repression, corruption, and failures. But that doesn't necessarily mean they want a return to royal rule. The Shah's regime was brutal and authoritarian. Savak's torture and repression are well documented. The economic growth of the White Revolution mostly benefited elites. The Shah's closeness to America, his Western lifestyle, and his celebration of pre-Islamic Persian history alienated religious conservatives and nationalists alike. When the revolution came, millions of Iranians genuinely wanted him gone. What followed, however, has been worse in many ways. The Islamic Republic has been repressive, economically stagnant, isolated internationally, and plagued by corruption. Iran's economy has barely grown in the 4 decades since 1979. The average per capita growth rate has been near zero. The country that once boasted 10% annual growth now struggles to provide basic services. Young Iranians face unemployment, inflation, and a government that restricts their freedoms. This has created a strange nostalgia for the Pahlavi era among some Iranians. They look back at the 1960s and 1970s and see economic growth, international prestige, and modernization. They conveniently forget the repression and inequality. Crown Prince Reza tries to capitalize on this nostalgia while also promising he's different from his father. He says he wants democracy, equal rights for all Iranians regardless of religion or ethnicity, fair trials, and no summary executions. He promises a secular government that respects human rights. Whether he would actually deliver on those promises if he somehow returned to power is unknowable. He's never governed. He's never held real political power. He's lived in exile since he was a teenager. He's supported financially by what remains of his family's wealth and by wealthy Iranian exiles who long for a different Iran. But inside Iran, his support is uncertain. Some polls show interest in monarchy restoration, others don't. The Islamic Republic controls the country with an iron fist, making it nearly impossible to gauge true public opinion. Crown Prince Reza's children will never know the Iran their grandfather ruled. His 3 daughters, Noor, Iman, and Farah, were all born in exile. They're American, educated in the West, several generations removed from the peacock throne. Reza has stated that as he believes in equal rights between men and women, his daughters are successively his heirs. It's a progressive statement, but it also underscores how distant this family has become from the traditional monarchy their grandfather embodied. The price of lost kingdoms. The Pahlavi story is a study in how quickly power can evaporate and how devastating that loss can be. Reza Shah built a dynasty from nothing through sheer force of will. He took a weak, divided Persia and transformed it into modern Iran. His son Mohammad Reza expanded that vision, using oil wealth and American support to make Iran a regional power. For 2 generations, the Pahlavis ruled with absolute authority. Then, in less than a year, it all collapsed. A few months of protests, strikes, and demonstrations brought down a regime that controlled a powerful military, an extensive secret police, and billions of dollars in oil revenue. The Shah, who had seemed so secure, fled with his family into exile. He died within 18 months. His dynasty ended after just 54 years. What makes the Pahlavi tragedy particularly poignant is what happened afterward. The Islamic Revolution promised freedom from tyranny, but it delivered a different form of tyranny. The economy collapsed. A brutal 8-year war with Iraq killed hundreds of thousands. The country became isolated internationally. The government executed thousands of political prisoners. Women's rights regressed. The promise of the revolution turned into another kind of nightmare, and the Pahlavi family, scattered across the globe, watched it all from a distance. Empress Farah has lived to see 2 of her children take their own lives, unable to cope with the trauma of exile. Crown Prince Reza has spent 4 decades trying to regain something that may be lost forever. Princess Farah lives quietly, largely out of the public eye. The family's wealth, once staggering, has been spent or confiscated. What remains sustains a modest existence compared to the imperial opulence they once knew. There's a lesson in the Pahlavi story about the fragility of power and the permanence of trauma. Mohammad Reza Shah thought his throne was secure. He had the support of the United States. He had a modern military. He had oil wealth. He had built schools and hospitals and roads. He assumed that economic development and modernization would win his people's loyalty. He was wrong. When the population turned against him, none of it mattered. For his children, the lesson was even harsher. They learned that the life you're raised for can disappear overnight, that palaces can become prisons, that privilege can turn into exile, that even surrounded by wealth and family, you can be utterly lost. Layla and Ali Reza learned that lesson and couldn't survive it. Reza learned it and dedicated his life to reversing it, knowing he probably never will. Farah learned it and chose privacy over the spotlight. Empress Farah learned it and has endured decades of grief no mother should have to bear. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories. For decades, one family has controlled the conversation in living rooms across the world. Fox News, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Post, The Times of London, all part of an empire built by one man and fought over by his children. Behind the boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, siblings have turned on siblings, and a 94-year-old patriarch has waged war to ensure his vision survives his death. The battle that inspired succession played out in real courtrooms with real consequences. This is the story of the Murdoch family, media power, and a family at war. The man who built an empire. Keith Rupert Murdoch was born on March 11, 1931, in Melbourne, Australia. His father, Sir Keith Murdoch, was a distinguished war correspondent and newspaper publisher who'd built a respectable media business. Young Rupert grew up surrounded by journalism, politics, and the power that comes from controlling information. When Sir Keith died in 1952, Rupert was just 21 years old and studying at Oxford. He inherited the News, a small Adelaide newspaper that was losing money. Most people would have sold it. Rupert saw an opportunity. He returned to Australia, took control, and transformed the struggling publication into a profitable tabloid filled with crime stories, scandals, and sensationalism. It worked. Readers bought it. Advertisers followed. Over the next 2 decades, Rupert expanded aggressively. He bought more newspapers across Australia, then moved into television. In 1969, he acquired The Sun in London and turned it into Britain's largest-selling tabloid, complete with page 3 topless models that became infamous. In 1973, he moved to the United States, buying the San Antonio Express-News. The following year, he launched the National Star, an American tabloid modelled after his British successes. But Rupert wanted more than tabloids. In 1976, he bought the New York Post, one of America's oldest newspapers. In 1981, he purchased the Times and the Sunday Times of London, prestige publications that gave him respectability. Then came his masterstroke. In 1985, Rupert bought 20th Century Fox, a struggling Hollywood studio. The following year, he launched Fox Broadcasting Company, creating America's fourth major television network. Throughout all this expansion, Rupert faced a problem. US law required television station owners to be American citizens. In 1985, Rupert gave up his Australian citizenship and became an American. It was a pragmatic decision. Citizenship meant nothing compared to empire. In 1996, Rupert launched Fox News Channel. Under Roger Ailes, it became the most watched cable news network in America, shaping political discourse and conservative thought for a generation. The Wall Street Journal came in 2007 when News Corporation bought Dow Jones for $5 billion. Rupert now controlled both ends of the conversation: populist tabloids for the masses and prestigious business journalism for the elite. By the 2000s, Rupert Murdoch's empire touched every English-speaking nation on earth. He owned newspapers, television networks, movie studios, book publishers, and digital properties. But empires need heirs, and Rupert had 6 children from 3 marriages. The question of succession would tear his family apart: the children and the marriages. Rupert's first marriage was to Patricia Booker, a former shop assistant and flight attendant in 1956. They had one daughter, Prudence, born in 1958. The marriage lasted 11 years before ending in divorce in 1967. Prudence, known as Prue, grew up largely away from the media spotlight, eventually settling in Australia and working in various roles within News Corporation over the years. Just 17 days after his divorce from Patricia, Rupert married Anna Maria Torv, a Scottish-born journalist working for one of his newspapers. Anna was ambitious, intelligent, and understood the media business. Between 1968 and 1972, they had 3 children: Elizabeth, Lachlan, and James. Elizabeth was born in 1968. From childhood, she showed interest in the family business, eventually founding her own television production company, Shine Group, which she built into a successful enterprise before selling it to 21st Century Fox in 2011. Lachlan, born in 1971, was named after Rupert's grandfather. James arrived in 1972. All 3 would eventually work in senior positions within their father's companies, and all 3 would compete for his approval and the ultimate prize: control of the empire. Rupert's marriage to Anna lasted 32 years. Then, in 1997, Rupert met Wendy Deng at a company event in Hong Kong. Deng was 30 years old, working as an executive at Star TV, one of News Corp's Asian properties. Rupert was 66. They began an affair. In June 1999, Rupert filed for divorce from Anna after she discovered the relationship. The divorce settlement with Anna was reportedly around $1.7 billion in assets and cash, one of the largest divorce settlements at that time. But more importantly for Rupert's children, the divorce agreement included the creation of the Murdoch Family Trust. This trust would hold the controlling shares in News Corporation and eventually Fox Corporation. The terms were clear. Upon Rupert's death, voting rights would be split equally among his 4 oldest children: Prue, Elizabeth, Lachlan, and James. Anna insisted on this arrangement to protect her children's inheritance. Rupert agreed because it allowed him to avoid giving Anna half his entire fortune. Just 17 days after his divorce from Anna was finalised, Rupert married Wendy Deng aboard his yacht in New York Harbour. Over the following years, they had 2 daughters: Grace, born in 2001, and Chloe, born in 2003. The girls grew up in a world of extreme privilege, but they would not have voting rights in the family trust. They would be financial beneficiaries, but would have no say in how the companies were run. Rupert's marriage to Wendy ended in 2013 amid rumours of her relationship with former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. The divorce was swift and relatively quiet. In 2016, at age 84, Rupert married Jerry Hall, the former supermodel and ex-partner of Mick Jagger. That marriage lasted until 2022, when they divorced. At 91, Rupert was single again. But long before these later marriages, the seeds of family warfare had been planted. Rupert had created a structure where his 4 oldest children would share power equally after his death. What he didn't anticipate was how differently those 4 children would view the world and how determined he would become to change the rules. The rise of Lachlan. From childhood, Lachlan Murdoch was groomed to inherit his father's empire. He was the oldest son, bearing his great-grandfather's name, and Rupert saw himself in the boy. Lachlan was sent to elite schools, given roles within News Corporation while still in his 20s, and positioned as the natural successor. In his 30s, Lachlan was made Deputy Chief Operating Officer of News Corporation, effectively the number 2 executive in the entire company. He moved to New York, worked closely with his father, and seemed destined for the top job. Then, in 2005, Lachlan suddenly resigned. He told associates he was tired of the corporate infighting, frustrated with his father's management style, and felt stifled. He moved back to Australia with his wife Sarah and their children, seemingly done with the family business. But staying away proved impossible. Lachlan returned to News Corp's board in 2014. When the company split into 2 entities in 2013, 21st Century Fox for entertainment properties and News Corp for publishing, Lachlan positioned himself to lead both. In 2015, he became co-chairman of 21st Century Fox alongside his father. When Rupert stepped back from day-to-day operations in 2023, Lachlan became CEO of Fox Corporation and chairman of News Corp. He was finally where he'd always been meant to be, at the top. Politically, Lachlan was known to be more conservative than his siblings, more aligned with Fox News' right-wing editorial stance, more comfortable with the populist, combative style that had made the network successful. He'd developed close relationships with conservative media figures and politicians. When his father looked at Lachlan, he saw someone who would preserve what he'd built, who understood that Fox News' audience demanded a certain perspective and who wouldn't apologise for it. But Lachlan's siblings saw things differently. James, the liberal dissenter. James Murdoch was, by many accounts, just as talented as his older brother. He was charismatic, strategic, and had proven himself running BSKYB in the UK before returning to take senior roles in the US operations. Between 2015 and 2020, James served as CEO of 21st Century Fox, working alongside his father and brother. He seemed poised to potentially take over the entire empire, but James was developing political views that diverged sharply from his father's. He questioned Fox News' editorial direction, particularly its embrace of climate change, skepticism, and its increasingly partisan coverage. His wife, Catherine Murdoch, was politically progressive, involved in democratic politics and causes, and James began openly expressing similar views. The breaking point came in the aftermath of the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. Fox News' coverage, James felt, had contributed to the political polarisation that led to that day. He'd already resigned from the News Corp board in 2020, citing disagreements over editorial content. Now, watching Fox News hosts and his family's properties continue down what he saw as a dangerous path, James spoke out publicly. In interviews, James described Fox News' coverage as disinformation. He criticised the network's role in American political life. He donated money to Joe Biden's campaign and to democratic causes. For Rupert, this was betrayal. The son he'd groomed alongside Lachlan was now attacking the crown jewel of the family empire, questioning its editorial integrity and threatening its relationship with its audience. Rupert became convinced that if James gained control of Fox News after his death, he would change it. He might moderate its coverage, or worse, sell it entirely. The network that Rupert had built to challenge what he saw as liberal mainstream media bias would be compromised. This, Rupert decided, could not happen. Elizabeth and Prue were wild cards. Elizabeth had always been entrepreneurial, building her own companies rather than climbing the ladder within News Corp. She'd been successful, selling Shine Group for hundreds of millions. She was moderate politically, more aligned with James than Lachlan, but less outspoken. Prue was the oldest, but had always been somewhat separate from the main family drama, living in Australia and working quietly within the organisation. Rupert feared that James could convince Elizabeth and Prue to join him in ousting Lachlan after Rupert's death. 3 votes against 1 would give them control. They could fire Lachlan, bring in outside management, change Fox News' editorial direction, or sell properties that Rupert wanted kept. The trust structure he'd agreed to in his divorce from Anna, equal votes for the 4 oldest children, now seemed like a terrible mistake. Project Family Harmony. In mid-2023, Lachlan initiated a plan. He called it Project Family Harmony, though the name would prove darkly ironic. The goal was simple: change the Murdoch family trust to give Lachlan sole voting control, eliminating his siblings' ability to interfere. The trust had been called irrevocable, but it contained a clause. Changes could be made if they were done in good faith, for the benefit of all beneficiaries. Lachlan and Rupert's lawyers argued that maintaining Fox News' conservative editorial direction was financially beneficial. The audience expected it. Advertisers paid for it. Shareholders relied on it. If James and the others gained control and changed course, the company's value would plummet. Therefore, stripping them of their votes was actually protecting their financial interests. In December 2023, Rupert filed to change the trust. He moved it to Nevada, a state with favourable probate laws and extreme confidentiality protections. Nevada trust proceedings are so secret that they don't even appear on public court dockets. Perfect for a family trying to fight without the world watching. When James, Elizabeth, and Prue learned what their father and brother were doing, they were stunned. This wasn't a business disagreement. This was Rupert and Lachlan trying to disinherit them from any meaningful control of their own family's company. The 3 siblings hired lawyers and fought back. The secret trial. In September 2024, the case went to trial in Reno, Nevada. The proceedings were sealed. Parties to the case referred to it only as in the matter of the Doe 1 Trust. Reporters camped outside the Washoe County Courthouse, hoping to glimpse family members arriving, but inside, the drama unfolded in complete secrecy. Approximately 50 attorneys represented the various parties. The cost was staggering, but for a media empire worth billions, no expense was too great. Testimony was heard about Rupert's intentions when he created the trust, about whether the proposed changes truly benefited all the children, about whether Rupert and Lachlan were acting in good faith or simply trying to consolidate power. According to later reports, the trial revealed years of family dysfunction. Testimony touched on painful secrets, manipulation, media leaks, and devious betrayals. James and his wife, Catherine, who spoke extensively to journalists after the trial, described a family culture where children competed ruthlessly for their father's approval, where Rupert deliberately pitted them against each other, where love and business became impossible to separate. The 3 opposing siblings argued that they weren't planning to oust Lachlan. They said they just wanted their rightful place at the table, a say in the companies their family had built. But Rupert and Lachlan's lawyers painted a different picture. They suggested James was a threat, that he'd already shown his willingness to criticise Fox News publicly, that giving him voting power would inevitably lead to conflict, and potentially the destruction of what Rupert had spent decades building. In December 2024, Nevada Probate Commissioner Edmund J. Gorman Jr. issued his ruling. It was devastating for Rupert and Lachlan. In a 96-page opinion, Commissioner Gorman found that they had acted in bad faith. The effort to change the trust was a carefully crafted charade designed to permanently cement Lachlan Murdoch's executive roles without regard for the other siblings' legitimate interests. The commissioner wrote that the plan was an attempt to stack the deck in Lachlan's favour, making his succession immutable. This violated the requirement that trust changes be made in good faith for everyone's benefit. The proposed changes were denied. Rupert and Lachlan immediately filed an appeal. The battle would continue, the settlement. But appeals take time, and time was something Rupert, at 94, didn't have in unlimited supply. His health remained relatively good, but the stress of the legal battle was taking its toll on the entire family. Behind the scenes, negotiations began. James had apparently made a prior attempt at settlement earlier in the process. His proposal included potentially selling his and his sister's interest in the trust, but those terms would have loosened Rupert and Lachlan's control, putting financial strain on them. That proposal went nowhere. Now, after the December 2024 court loss, the dynamics had shifted. Rupert and Lachlan needed a deal. They couldn't risk an appeal that might take years and might ultimately fail. The other three siblings had won in court, but faced the prospect of years more litigation, even if they won on appeal. And winning might mean nothing if Lachlan simply refused to cooperate as CEO, creating corporate dysfunction that hurt everyone. In September 2025, a settlement was reached. The terms were announced by News Corp and Fox Corporation, ending one of the most dramatic succession battles in corporate history. Under the agreement, the existing Murdoch family trust would be dissolved. A new trust would be created. Lachlan would have sole voting control. His two younger sisters, Grace and Chloe, would also be beneficiaries of the new trust, but without voting rights. The trust would hold approximately 36% of Fox Corporation's Class B voting stock and 33% of News Corp's Class B voting stock, enough to control both companies. James, Elizabeth, and Prue would sell their shares. The sale of approximately 16.9 million shares of Fox Class B voting stock and about 14.2 million shares of News Corp Class B common stock would generate around $1 billion for each of the three departing siblings. They would also be subject to standstill agreements, preventing them from buying shares or taking certain actions against the companies in the future. The stock sales would be funded in part by the Murdoch companies themselves, selling shares currently worth over $1.4 billion. This diluted the family's overall voting control from roughly 40% to around 33%, but Lachlan would still have enough to control both companies. And with his three oldest siblings completely out, there would be no one to challenge him. The settlement was announced on Monday, September 8, 2025. After decades of positioning, years of legal warfare, and months of secret negotiations, the succession was finally settled. Lachlan had won. Rupert had achieved his goal, and three of his children had been paid to leave. What it means? The settlement ensures that Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, the Times of London, and all the Murdoch properties will maintain their conservative editorial stance for the foreseeable future. Lachlan, who shares his father's political views, or is perhaps even more ideologically committed, will have unchallenged control. There will be no board fights, no editorial debates, no attempts to moderate or change course. For viewers and readers of Murdoch properties, this means continuity. Fox News will remain Fox News. The editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal will continue their conservative perspective. The New York Post will keep its tabloid populism. The audience that Rupert spent decades cultivating will get what they expect. For James, Elizabeth, and Prue, it's a mixed outcome. They receive approximately $1 billion each, enormous sums of money by any standard. But they've been forced out of the family business, stripped of any say in companies their family built. They can't buy shares, can't influence editorial direction, can't challenge Lachlan's decisions. They're effectively exiled from their own family's empire. James and Catherine Murdoch have already moved on, investing in climate change initiatives, technology companies, and progressive political causes through their foundation, Quadrivium. They live in Manhattan, far from Fox News' headquarters, building a life completely separate from the Murdoch media empire. Elizabeth continues running her own businesses. Prue remains in Australia, living quietly. For Grace and Chloe, now in their early 20s, the settlement makes them wealthy beneficiaries with no power. They'll receive dividends and financial distributions, but have no vote on corporate direction. Rupert has provided for them financially while ensuring they can't interfere with Lachlan's control. The cost of empire. The Murdoch family saga offers lessons about wealth, power, and family. Rupert built one of the largest media empires in history, accumulating billions and influencing politics across multiple continents. But that success came at a cost measured in broken relationships, children set against each other, and a family unable to trust one another, even in death. Rupert deliberately created competition among his children. He gave them roles, took them away, promoted and demoted them, forcing them to constantly prove themselves worthy. He may have believed this made them stronger, more competitive, better leaders. Instead, it created permanent rifts. Former employees have described Rupert's management style as intentionally pitting executives against each other, creating an atmosphere where loyalty to him mattered more than competence or results. His children weren't exempt from this treatment. They were the primary subjects of it. The pattern started early. When Lachlan was Deputy Chief Operating Officer at News Corp in the early 2000s, he reportedly clashed with other executives, including his father's trusted lieutenants. Rupert didn't step in to support his son. Instead, he seemed to enjoy the conflict, letting it play out. Eventually, Lachlan left in frustration. When James rose to prominence running BSKYB and later became CEO of 21st Century Fox, he too faced similar dynamics. Brilliant one moment, doubted the next, never quite sure where he stood with his father. Elizabeth chose a different path precisely because she'd watched her brothers struggle. She built Shine Group herself, creating something that was entirely hers, where she answered to no one but herself. The company produced hit shows like MasterChef and The Biggest Loser, proving she had the Murdoch business instincts without needing her father's empire. When she sold to 21st Century Fox in 2011, it seemed like a reunion with the family business. But by 2015, she bought it back, suggesting that working within the Murdoch structure, even in a company she'd created, was still suffocating. James and Lachlan, once close brothers, barely speak now. Their political differences might have been manageable in another family, but in a family where media and politics are inseparable, where the business is built on taking political positions, those differences became existential. When James called Fox News disinformation, he wasn't just criticising a company. He was attacking his father's legacy and his brother's leadership. He was saying that the thing Rupert was most proud of, Fox News' influence on American politics, was harmful to democracy. For Lachlan, who devoted his life to the business and shared his father's worldview, James's public criticisms felt like betrayal. It wasn't a policy disagreement. It was a fundamental rejection of everything Lachlan believed the company stood for. The brothers had once worked together, travelled together, planned the future of the business together. Now they communicate primarily through lawyers. Elizabeth, caught between her brothers, built her own success outside the family companies. She sold Shine Group to 21st Century Fox in 2011, but later bought it back in 2015, preferring independence to being part of the Murdoch machine. She testified during the secret trial, supporting James against their father and older brother, fracturing those relationships perhaps beyond repair. Friends say Elizabeth tried for years to be the peacemaker, to find middle ground, to keep the family together. But eventually, she had to choose a side, and she chose James. That decision likely means her relationship with Rupert and Lachlan will never fully recover. Prue, the oldest, has remained largely outside the drama. Born to Rupert's first wife, and now in her 60s, she's always been somewhat separate from the tight-knit trio of Elizabeth, Lachlan and James. But even she was drawn into the court battle, forced to choose sides against her own father. Prue's relationship with Rupert had always been more distant. She was the daughter from his first marriage, the child he left behind when he remarried just 17 days after divorcing her mother. The court battle simply formalised what had perhaps always been true. Prue was part of the family, but never quite in the inner circle. And Rupert himself, at 94, achieved his goal, but at what cost? He ensured Lachlan would inherit unchallenged control. He protected Fox News' editorial direction. He preserved what he built. But he did it by going to war with 3 of his 6 children, spending millions on legal fees, exposing family secrets in court testimony, and, ultimately, paying billions to force them out. He's a man who controls newspapers, television networks, and movie studios, who can influence elections and shape public opinion across 3 continents. Yet he couldn't find a way to keep his own family together. The trust structure he agreed to in 1999 as part of his divorce from Anna, equal votes for the 4 oldest children, was meant to protect them. Instead, it became a weapon, a prize to fight over, a structure that had to be destroyed for Rupert to get what he wanted. The irony is painful. Rupert created the trust to avoid giving Anna half his fortune in the divorce. Then he spent years trying to change that trust, eventually paying his children billions to leave, perhaps costing him more than the divorce would have. Anna Murdoch, who died in 2022, lived long enough to see the family she'd tried to protect with that trust agreement tear itself apart over it. She'd insisted on equal voting rights for all 4 children, specifically to prevent one from dominating the others. She knew Rupert's tendency to pick favourites, to create competition, to value loyalty over fairness. The trust was supposed to force the siblings to work together, to make decisions collectively, to protect each other from their father's manipulations. Instead, it gave them something to fight over, a legal structure that ensured conflict rather than preventing it. The younger children, Grace and Chloe, now in their 20s, have witnessed all of this. They've watched their older half-siblings battle their father in court. They've seen billions of dollars spent on lawyers arguing about control and power. They're beneficiaries of the new trust, but have no voting rights, which means they'll be wealthy but powerless. Perhaps exactly what Rupert wanted after seeing what voting rights did to his older children's relationships. Whether they'll resent this exclusion or feel relieved to be spared the burden of empire remains to be seen. The inspiration for succession. Throughout the Murdoch family's real-life drama, comparisons to HBO's Succession have been inevitable. The show, created by Jesse Armstrong, followed the Roy family, owners of a conservative media empire, as aging patriarch Logan Roy's children compete for control. The parallels are obvious and intentional. Armstrong has acknowledged that the Murdoch family was one inspiration for the show, though he's drawn from multiple media dynasties. But when the real Murdoch children watched the 3rd episode of the final season, where Logan Roy dies unexpectedly, leaving chaos in his wake, it reportedly spurred them to action. Elizabeth's lawyer sent out a memo after that episode aired, determined to prevent the fictional drama from becoming their reality. The show depicted siblings forming alliances, betraying each other, making power plays, and, ultimately, destroying their relationships in pursuit of power. Real life has proven just as dramatic, with the added complexity that these are actual people, not characters, and the pain is genuine. Interestingly, Succession ends with the most competent and politically moderate sibling, losing to the least qualified but most ideologically aligned candidate. Art and life mirror each other uncomfortably. The Murdoch family's war is over, settled by lawyers and financial payouts. Lachlan has won complete control. Fox News will remain Fox News. The Wall Street Journal will keep its conservative editorial page. The empire Rupert built will continue under leadership that shares his vision. But the human cost is incalculable. Siblings who grew up together, who should have been each other's closest allies, are now estranged or barely civil. A father forced 3 of his children out of the family business to ensure the 4th could lead unchallenged. Billions in wealth couldn't prevent or heal these wounds. For those who consume Murdoch media, and that's millions of people across the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, the settlement means stability. The editorial direction they've come to expect won't change. Fox News viewers will get the same coverage. Wall Street Journal readers will get the same perspective. The Murdoch properties will continue shaping political discourse as they have for decades. But behind that stability is a family that couldn't find a way to share power, couldn't trust each other to preserve their father's legacy, couldn't separate love from business or politics from family. The Murdoch empire will survive Rupert's death intact, controlled by Lachlan and perpetuating Rupert's conservative vision. But the Murdoch family, as a functional unit, may have died long before Rupert ever will. The settlement announced in September 2025 ends the legal battle, but not the story. These relationships, once broken, rarely fully heal. James will continue building his own legacy, separate and opposed to Fox News. Elizabeth will run her own companies. Prue will live her quiet life in Australia. And Lachlan will run the empire, secure in his control, but isolated from half his family. The trust that was meant to protect Rupert's children became the thing that drove them apart. The empire that was supposed to be their shared inheritance became a prize only one could hold, and the father who built it all chose sides, sacrificing 3 children to ensure the 4th could rule alone. Media power came with a price. For the Murdochs, that price was family. And now, with the war over and the succession settled, they're left to count the cost and wonder if it was worth it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.